We're going to take you now to Louisville, Kentucky, where authorities are announcing a major financial settlement reached with the family of Breonna Taylor. Let's listen in.
That's not fair to our officers. That's not the right way to address these challenges. That's why we will create a program to include social workers at LMPD so they can provide support and assistance on certain police runs where their presence could be helpful. Metro Council has already initiated funds in this activity. And finally, we must have transparency and accountability for the work that our officers do. Good officers appreciate sunlight on their work, and we will take several steps to shine that light, including the following. We will now require a commanding officer to review and approve all search warrants, affidavits in support of search warrants, and risk matrices before an officer seeks judicial approval for the warrant. We're creating a clear command structure when executing warrants at multiple locations. We're adding additional protocols for money seized as evidence, expanding the random drug testing of officers, and we will negotiate with the FOP in 2021 to expand on the records that can be maintained in an officer's personnel files. We have updated the process when a police officer is being investigated by our professional standards unit and leaves LMPD before the completion of that investigation. Going forward, the chief's closing letter will state his or her findings based on the evidence that exists in the file at the time of the officer's separation from LMPD, if sufficient evidence exists in the record to make such a determination, or will state that insufficient evidence exists to make a finding. If the nature of the complaint is significant enough to have reasonably resulted in the suspension of the officer, the investigation will continue gathering evidence to evaluate if additional officers were involved or other problems exist. And finally, in order to ensure monitoring of any officers who may need additional training or other support, we will implement an early warning system that tracks all use of force incidents, citizen complaints, investigations, and other key factors. As part of its ongoing top-to-bottom review of LMPD, Hillard Heinz will evaluate the early warning system and recommend any needed improvements. This system will also be monitored through the soon-to-be-formed Office of Inspector General. These are significant policy changes on top of many others that we've already made, including those that are part of Breonna's law, as well as changes to policies on use of force, and if tear gas would ever need to be used. In addition to these policy changes, this settlement includes a payment to Breonna's estate of $12 million. I'm grateful for the hard work of my team and that of County Attorney Mike O'Connell and his team, and the cooperation and thoughtfulness with which the Taylor family and her attorneys work with us to get to this point. We're now going to hear from Lanita Baker, an attorney for Breonna's estate. Ms. Baker.
Justice for Breonna is multi-layered. What we were able to accomplish today through the civil settlement against the officers is tremendous, but it's only a portion of a single layer. When officers cause the death of an individual, it is imperative that we seek justice not only in the criminal system, but also in our civil system. That's when we hold people financially responsible. But it's important to know here that a financial settlement was non-negotiable without significant police reform, and that's what we were able to do today. We sought forth, as we went through negotiating the terms of this settlement and the reform, to engage police officers within the community, not just when they're dispatched to runs, but to get out, to volunteer in those communities in which they serve, to get to know their communities in other settings, to live within their communities, to dispatch social workers when they're needed for mental health crises, to recognize at-risk behavior by officers, implementing the early warning system, and to overhaul the system by which we execute search warrants that caused the death of Breonna Taylor on March 13th. It's important for her family that they minimize the risk of what happened to Breonna Taylor happening to any other family in Louisville, Kentucky, and we're going to continue that fight beyond the city of Louisville, Kentucky, and throughout this country to protect and reform police departments across America. We recognize that this reform is not all-encompassing, and there's still work to be done. And we commit our time, our talent, and our resources to continue to work with the community to fight the systemic racism plaguing our city. We will continue to work on behalf and with the protesters who have put their freedom on the line to bring awareness to not just Breonna Taylor, but to the systemic problems facing our city. For we know that without their voice, we would not be here today. Attorneys will ensure that prosecutors handling the case of protesters truly are administrators of justice and not being punitive simply because those individuals chose to use their voice to shine a light on what was going on in Louisville, Kentucky. We look forward to being a bridge from this community to our elected leaders to continue to push for change. We will continue to push for the mayor's office and our other elected leaders to implement policies put forth in a path forward which calls for community investment, the support for small businesses, affordable housing, closing the education achievement gap, jobs and workforce development, and as an overhaul to the criminal justice system. That document was produced and signed by over 50 organizations in this city, and it needs to be taken seriously. We look forward to working with other grassroots organizations to ensure that we continue to hold our elected leaders accountable, but also to ensure that we continue to work with our elected leaders, because we would not get the policy changes that we need, we would not get the legal changes that we need if we don't hold our elected leaders accountable. But in that same vein, we have to be willing to work with our elected leaders. The beauty of what happened here today, the reform and the settlement, and again, it's just a civil suit, happens when we work together. So we do thank Mayor Fisher and his team for committing to the reform. This is unheard of in one of these cases where you get a financial settlement and police reform. But again, it was important to us, to Breonna's family, to the lawyers involved, and it was important for us to give that back to the community, which has been fighting so hard to save Breonna Taylor's name. Lastly, as I stated when I started, justice for Breonna Taylor is multi-layered. We are not going to stop our calls to hold the officers responsible for Breonna's death accountable. We're going to continue to put pressure on the Attorney General's office to present a fair case to the grand jury, and we're going to wait. We know that that indictment is coming from the grand jury. We have faith that that indictment is coming from the grand jury. In addition to the Attorney General's office, we must remember that the FBI is also doing an investigation into whether there were criminal civil rights violations leading to and after Breonna Taylor's death. So we're going to be looking for the federal indictment to come from the Department of Justice as well. But it's important that people know that the city of Louisville, they're not the ones that can bring the charges. So today, what we did here was to do what we could do to bring a little bit of police reform, and it's just a start. But we finished the first mile in a marathon, and we got a lot more miles to go till we achieve and cross that finish line.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. We'll now hear from County Attorney Mike O'Connell, whose team worked diligently and thoughtfully to get us to this important agreement. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Palmer, may it please you today that we try to bring some assistance and help to you and your family. Breonna Taylor, Breonna Taylor's life matters. Breonna Taylor's life continues to matter, as you see here today. I've thought about Breonna's mother, Ms. Palmer, throughout everything that has led us today. The hole in my heart of losing a child as well is the greatest grief I've ever known in my life, and nothing can fill that hole. I've tried to think how I would have reacted if Breonna was my daughter. Ms. Palmer has shown remarkable grace and courage these past 6 months. We did not wait to engage Ms. Palmer's counsel to discuss this case. The independent investigations by the Attorney General's office and the FBI are welcomed, but that was not going to delay the work toward meaningful changes in our city. This is not simply a significant monetary figure, but as Ms. Baker just mentioned, it is a path of agreed action. The reforms were discussed and moved ahead by representatives from both parties. This work happened over many weeks with good faith and dedication by everybody that was involved. Everyone around the table was dedicated to advancing those reforms for the whole community. Ms. Palmer, we tried our best to get a start. Much time and effort went into this, and I offer my appreciation to all involved. Let me just finish by saying today alone is not enough. My hope is this agreement is the next step in building a more just Louisville. A more just Louisville is the medicine we need to heal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Next, we'll hear from Ben Crump, an attorney with Breonna's estate. Ben Crump.
Thank you, Mayor Fisher, Attorney Mike O'Connor, to the Louisville Metro Council, to Tamika Palmer. As I sit and look at her and Bianca, my heart is filled because with Lanita, Sam, and I, we have become like family. And it had been so long getting to this day where we could assure that Breonna Taylor life wouldn't be swept under the rug like so many other black women in America who have been killed by police, marginalized. So I'm grateful to the actions of the city of Louisville today. And it is not just the historic $12 million settlement, which, as I understand, is the largest amount ever paid out for a black woman in a wrongful death killed by a police in America. And Lanita, I believe it may be the largest amount ever paid for a black person in a police shooting. We're still trying to verify that. And it is certainly, Tamika Mallory, one of the largest amounts ever paid out for any person in the way of settlement in a police killing in America. But the comprehensive reform that the Louisville Metro Council and Mayor Fisher put forth is equally important, because this is about setting a precedence. When my great co-counsels from Kentucky, Lanita Baker and Sam Aguiar, first talked to me about this black woman who had been killed in her own apartment by this no-knock warrant, they were very concerned that nobody cared. Nobody cared about this black woman. Nobody cared about Tamika's baby. And that's when I started calling everybody I know to say that black women's lives matter too. I remember calling Reverend Al Sharpton saying, can I come on your show? I remember calling Ricky Smiley saying, can I get on your radio show, your national radio show? I called Tamika Mallory and my son and her team at Until Freedom. I called Senator Kamala Harris. I mean, I was saying to anybody who would listen, Breonna Taylor life matters. And Senator Kamala Harris was the first national elected official to go on national television and to say her name, Breonna Taylor. I called Teslim Figaro and Charlemagne and everybody to say, we cannot let her life be swept under the rug. And from all of these individuals and so many others, especially the activists who came and was on the ground here in Louisville saying that we won't let Breonna Taylor life be swept under the rug. And thank God, with what has happened today, Mayor Fisher, not just with the historic amount, but equally important with the reform that Attorney Bacon, Attorney O'Connor spoke of, it sets a precedence for other black women, that their lives won't be marginalized, that they will be valued. Lives like Sandra Bland, lives like Pamela Turner in Baytown, Texas, lives like 7-year-old Ayanna Stanley in Detroit, who also was killed as a result of a dangerous no-knock warrant. Because we have to speak truth to power when we get an opportunity. And these dangerous no-knock warrants are disproportionately executed against black people in America. And so I'm very happy that the Metro Council also stood united with Tamika Palmer to pass Breonna's law to abolish these dangerous no-knock warrants, because it was foreseeable who was most being put in danger with these no-knock warrants. And so I want to point out very significant what happened in Louisville here today. In representing George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Pamela Turner in Baytown, Texas, right outside of Houston, Terrence Crutcher in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Botham Jones in Dallas, Texas, Joseph Richardson in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and so many other names of black people who have been killed by police in America. While most of America is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, we in Black America are not only dealing with that pandemic, but we're also dealing with the 1619 pandemic. The pandemic that started 401 years ago when the first enslaved Africans came to America. And from that day to this one, we have been dealing with systematic racism and oppression that have killed us inside and outside the courtroom. So it is worth noting that in all those other cities, there has not been the responsive, comprehensive, and systematic reform that has occurred in Louisville, Kentucky, Tamika Palmer, in the name of Breonna Taylor. In the name of Breonna Taylor. But regardless of this landmark step on the journey to justice, we still are demanding that Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron bring charges immediately against the police officers that murdered Breonna Taylor. Immediately. This week, justice delayed is justice denied. The city leadership has done a significant step today, but now it is on Daniel Cameron and the Attorney General of Kentucky's office to bring charges, and at the very minimum, Lanita, second-degree manslaughter charges, because we want full justice for Breonna Taylor, not just partial justice. Breonna Taylor is a light to help heal what's happening in America. And for all those young people, those celebrities, athletes, but most importantly, the people who are on the ground, the people who are the activists and protesters who saying enough is enough. We see that there are two justice systems in America, one for Black America and one for white America. In Louisville, Kentucky, we took significant steps today in the name of Breonna Taylor of trying to correct this broken criminal justice system. And we do it in 3 phases. In the civil rights phase with this civil lawsuit, which is the only thing that Lanita and I can control. We can't control the criminal prosecution. The mayor's office and the city leadership all took a significant step in making sure that the civil rights of Breonna Taylor was recognized. And now we also need our legislative partners to help transform the protest into policy. We need Breonna's law, not just in Louisville, not just in the state of Kentucky, but all throughout the United States of America, because her life matters. And lastly, we need the criminal justice system, Daniel Cameron, to do its part to give the full constitutional guarantees of all citizens to a citizen, a daughter of Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor. And I would ask, in completing the healing, Mr. Mayor and City Attorney O'Connell, that all those young people who were courageous enough, like Tamika Palmer and so many of your own in Louisville, the unknown John Lewises of the world who are creating good trouble here in Louisville, I would implore you, since Tamika calls me and Rev the Black America's Attorney General, and I don't know if the Attorney General of the United States is going to employ you to do it, but I will implore you to drop the charges against the nonviolent protesters who was exercising their First Amendment rights because they said Breonna Taylor life mattered. And these young people should not have criminal records because they were on the right side of history. You all took a significant step, and we want you all to be on the right side of history with us completely. Drop those charges in Breonna Taylor's name. Let's do justice in Breonna Taylor's name. And let's do justice with love in our hearts, because that is emblematic of Breonna Taylor, who Tamika says is the best version of her. Say her name, Breonna Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Crump. Next, Tamika Palmer, Breonna's mom, would like to share a few words with us.
As significant as today is, it's only the beginning of getting full justice for Breonna. We must not lose focus on what the real job is. And with that being said, it's time to move forward with the criminal charges, because she deserves that and much more. Her beautiful spirit and personality is working through all of us on the ground. So please continue to say her name, Breonna Taylor.